Hello, I'm Barry Forshaw. I'm the author of a variety of books, including British Gothic cinema, and then one that is one of my bestsellers. I can't imagine why. Sex and Film, and British crime film. Now, this one's particularly apropos because the book I'm here to read or talk about another chapter from is Crime Fiction: A Reader's Guide. This is another of those 5-minute whistle-stop tours through a chapter of Crime Fiction: A Reader's Guide. It will outrage all the authors whose names I will not mention in the next 5 minutes, but my plea is that you have to read the book to see all the people. This is a mere bagatelle, a mere soupçon of what's in the book. I'm going to talk about 11 authors very quickly who are in the chapter which is called Cops. We were talking about Private Eyes last week. This chapter is called Cops, Police Procedurals, and Mavericks. Private Eyes are nearly always mavericks, but so are a hell of a lot of literary coppers. They kind of have to be. They kind of have to be, despite being part of the establishment, anti-establishment in their ethos, because it makes a good drama. I'm going to start with one of Britain's best-selling writers and one of Britain's best-loved crime writers, Mark Billingham, whose Tom Thorne series has gone from strength to strength, is amazingly consistent over the years. It's been filmed with David Morrissey, my fellow Liverpudlian, and successfully so. The series is terrific. It's really well written. Mark is particularly good at character. I know that's a sine qua non of crime fiction, but he is very good at it. In fact, my favorite of his books is a standalone, In the Dark, which is actually about race as much as anything else, and is obviously very apropos at the moment. And then I move very swiftly on to another best-selling British crime writer who is also resident in America and who is the creator of Jack Reacher, and that is, of course, Lee Child. What can you say about Lee Child? Character-wise, you can say that he's a really nice guy. I always have a problem when I'm talking to him because I feel like a child. I always have to look up at him. He is so immensely tall. He's created in Jack Reacher possibly the best current single franchise character in the whole of the genre. And as we know, there has been a successful series of Tom Cruise films, although there was some dispute about Tom Cruise being cast in the role. The books move like an express train, and they, to me, suggest Lee's time in visual entertainment and TV and radio and so forth, because they are fully aware of what's required to function as perfectly functioning, well-tooled mechanisms, machines. They're extremely good. Interestingly, Lee has recently tired, it would seem, of writing the franchise himself and has handed it over to his brother, Andrew Grant, who I met quite a few years ago, actually, at Harrogate. He's a good writer in his own right. It remains to be seen whether or not the franchise will be sustained with a different writer, but Lee is still heavily involved. Then I move on to another writer with television connections. In fact, a writer who, to my knowledge, is the only current writer, correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm sure somebody will, who has two simultaneous franchises running at the same time, which is Anne Cleeves. Anne, of course, has the wonderful disheveled copper Vera in the Vera series. If you've met Brenda Blethyn, which you tend to when you meet Anne at launches, she's incredibly well turned out. So it shows how good her transformation is as Vera. And the Jamie Perez Shetland series. Anne and I share a liking for Scandinavian crime. She really knows her onions when it comes to Nordic noir. And it's interesting that the Shetland series has a Nordic feel in terms of I'm talking about the filming of them. She likes that, and her directors who I've spoken to also like that fact that they've tried to import some of the feel, the frigidity, if you like, of the Nordic noir scene. She's a very good writer and has been around for quite a while and has written quite a few books. Another female writer who is also top of the tree is, of course, Martina Cole. Martina is best known for her books set in the criminal underworld, of which she really has few parallels. But she does write a detective, Kate Burrows, and that's why she's in this chapter. She's also in other chapters. I should point out that Crime Fiction: A Reader's Guide has massive overlaps because there are so many people who write in different genres. So other than just run an alphabetical list of authors from A to Z, I've had to shoehorn people into different categories. Martina is an institution. Her books are, she's quite proud of the fact that her books are, A, the most popular books in prison, and also among the most shoplifted books in Britain. That's a mark of their popularity. She is very successful writer indeed, and she knows exactly what she's doing in terms of the books that she delivers. I then move on to, very swiftly, you see how quick this is, to a writer who I last interviewed at his hotel near Victoria. When I walked into the hotel and met his PR who was introducing to me, she looked very frazzled. She said, I'm afraid he's on sparkling form, which I realized was a euphemism today. He's already chewed up 3 interviewers in a row. This was, of course, James Ellroy. Well, James Ellroy is legendary, and his LA Quartet is a pinnacle of the crime writer's art. I haven't liked some of his more recent books. His experiments have left me cold, but the LA Quartet, and particularly LA Confidential, which also made an excellent film, is among his very best work. I should point out that Crime Fiction: A Reader's Guide also covers films, so the very successful film of LA Confidential is covered. I find him fine, as I have done in the past. I think I get away with a certain amount that younger, say, female interviewers might not. He's kind of, in not necessarily the best sense of the word, a man's man, and prefers to deal with men of just about his own age, which I was. In fact, I mentioned to him that I might have been the only person interviewing him who could actually sing the song Perfidia, which was the title of the book. He then insisted that I do. I'm now on to another writer, another American writer who's a particular favorite of mine. There used to be in Islington, which is where I am now, a regular monthly meal of the crime fiction critics of the various newspapers, including the late, great Marcel Berlins. This is quite useful as a kind of early warning system, a Bush telegraph of who was coming along that we should all pay attention to. We would all delight in telling each other who we should read. And early on, we all said to each other, Attica Locke. We realized that she was a terrific writer, a writer of literary crime, a writer with a great psychological reach, a great sense of place. She writes about the Black experience, but not just about the Black experience. She said to me that she didn't want to just address that as her principal issue. It's part of the books, but these are not agenda-led books. They are extremely good novels, which inter alia talk about race. I'll now talk about the 2 baronesses, both of whom sadly are no longer with us, and whose company I greatly enjoyed. I have to say that I enjoyed the company of Petey James more than that of Ruth Rendell, because she was more welcoming. This is leaving aside the quality of their books, but she was definitely a more friendly and welcoming personality. When I did the last event with her, just shortly before her death, when she was still very sharp. And I remember I was able to introduce her by saying, at a panel with Val Mcdermott and Stella Remington, this was Petey James, a woman who was first published in 1962 and was still a best-selling writer. I mean, what can you say about that? Adam Dalgleish is one of the great literary coppers. I once suggested to her that there aren't many real-life coppers who are published poets, and she took me to task and said, yes, there are. She could name at least 2. So I was obviously wrong. Ruth Rendell, of course, her fellow peer, they would argue about politics, obviously, being from different ends of the political spectrum. Ruth Rendell was a writer who, when I've interviewed Scandinavian writers in Denmark, in Sweden, in Iceland, and asked who their favorite British writer was, she came up again and again. Ruth Rendell's is a kind of progenitor of Nordic noir, one might argue. In many ways, she was the closest this country had in terms of writing kind of dark, dyspeptic psychological fiction to Patricia Highsmith. In some ways, she was the English Highsmith, with the same, shall we say, jaundiced view of human nature. Another writer I met several times was Mr. Lombino, Evan Hunter, who, of course, is Ed Mcbain. he twice mentioned to me how annoyed he was that things that he had created were kind of taken over by other people, which was the ensemble cop novel, which is his 87th Precinct series. Hill Street Blues ripped it off fairly heavily. I think the French greeted that show with the words, Ed Mcbain comes to TV, which of course it wasn't. He was also slightly resentful of the writers who had made forensic pathology the central tenet of their writing. I'll be talking about that in another chapter, because he had done it first. They're a wonderfully rich and varied collection of novels. It's nice occasionally to pick up an Evan Hunter book like The Blackwood Jungle again. Then I'm going to end with two of the very best-selling writers and two of the best writers in Britain. They are two Scots. When I wrote an earlier book, which was Brit Noir, I contacted both Ian Rankin and Val Mcdermott and asked them both if they wanted to be in a book called Brit Noir, because it was just at the time of the referendum. Both of them said to me, yes, of course, why would I not be? Well, I said, well, Scotland may be a foreign country shortly, which still isn't, and who knows what will happen. Ian, I was fortunate enough to persuade to write the foreword for Crime Fiction: A Reader's Guide. He's still comfortably the best-selling male British crime writer, along with Lee Child, and his series just gets better and better. I remember when he once said to me that John Hannah had been cast as Rebus. He could see I looked askance at this and said, well, he's a very good actor, but he looks about 19. He still looks about 19, even though he's now middle-aged. And he certainly doesn't look like a recovering alcoholic, paunchy, middle-aged cop. Ian wasn't having any of that. It's interesting that when Ken Stott was cast as Rebus, I asked him, well, surely now you have your Rebus, because here's the man who is a good actor and looks the part. And Ian said something I thought very interesting. He's still not the Rebus in my head. The Rebus in Ian Rankin's head is to be found in the books. And finally, Val Mcdermott. I think it was a wake for Ruth Rendell. I went up to Val and we were chatting, and I asked her mischievously, who was the current new British Queen of Crime, now that Petey James and Ruth Rendell had died? She looked at me with a smile and said, that's for people like you, people who write for the newspapers, to say. So I then said the new Queen of Crime, I think it was in The Independent, and her publisher said to me, we're going to use that. It's fine with me. She is an absolutely terrific writer, a writer of real psychological depth and penetration. In the Tony Jordan and Carol Hill series, she's created one of the great police duos. The series, to me, has not had a misstep. It's just been so utterly consistent. For a while, Val was the, which she wasn't happy with, the poster girl for violence in crime fiction. But she made a good point. She said, when attacked for this, women are the principal victims of violence, certainly in domestic relationships. So why shouldn't women write about such things? She has moved away from being seen as that kind of poster girl now. She's just seen as one of the great British writers. She doesn't mind being called British still. That's the chapter in essence, and I'll be back shortly to talk about the next chapter.